Finally, the star of the show, Dan Brock, has an opportunity to answer all of our questions and resolve all controversies. So Dan, it is you have the floor. I'll get you one.
Dan is not going to answer all of your questions. I think you knew that. I'd just like to make a few comments. The first on the presentations. The first thing I'd like to do is just say how deeply grateful I am to all of you for having participated in this event. It's actually the second time I've had something like this, because I retired from Brown when I went to NIH, and I became an emeritus. So I'm about to become an emeritus again, but this is by far the most satisfying and enjoyable last day and a half that I've had in quite a few days and a half. I'm just going to make a few comments on the different talks that you've heard today, resolving none of them. If you actually want to ask some questions, I'll be happy to do my best to answer them. The first thing that I thought about when I read Alex's paper is, how on earth did he know what I did that morning in 1978 and what I had for breakfast? I actually clarified to Alex that in the written version of his paper, I didn't have what he said I had for breakfast when I went into my office. But I think Alex's presentation emphasized why I felt so fortunate to have spent a year working on the President's Commission. The staff was wonderful there. I didn't overlap much with Dan Wickler, and a little bit more, but not too much, with Alan Buchanan, because they thought one staff philosopher is enough at any one time. But it was an experience that was very different than philosophers usually have. Up to that point, I don't think I'd ever written a co-authored article. And many philosophers have never written co-authored articles. That's not the typical thing that we do. And we don't work in settings where you're working very closely with other people. In many cases, those other people aren't philosophers. That was what working at the President's Commission was like. I enjoyed it immensely. I hope I learned a lot. I thought I learned a lot from it. And I've done a lot of co-authoring since then with Alan Buchanan, with Joanne Lynn, with a number of other people. It's an experience that, as I say, I think many philosophers, probably most philosophers, never have. I think it's a good experience. I think that I learned a lot, at least as much from working with economists and sociologists and lawyers and so forth as I did from just working with the philosophers involved. So it was a great time. I am glad I did it. I thank Dan for calling me. My recollection, Dan, is that you called me the morning after Reagan was elected and asked if I wanted to do that. And my response was, well, there probably won't be a President's Commission now. And even if there was, I don't think I wanted to be involved with it. But it turned out that the President's Commission and its commissioners was a very low on a priority list of Reagan in terms of what he wanted to do. So his commissioners didn't come in until we were mostly done with our work. And the previous commissioners, of course, had been Carter appointees. And but even with that, there was less disagreement on these issues, except for the ethics, access to healthcare report, than I guess I would have anticipated with that kind of ideological change in the structure of the commission. I think in some ways the most important thing we did in that, the access to healthcare report was just gathering the data about the number of Americans who didn't have health insurance, because that wasn't widely known then. It wasn't, I think, known much at all. Our best estimate was there were about 22 to 25 million Americans without health insurance. This was in 1981. And when we published that, people said, oh, well, you must have forgotten to count Medicare, or you must have forgotten to count Medicaid. Well, of course, we didn't. There simply wasn't a general public appreciation of the degree of the problem. And I think if we did anything useful on that report and on that issue, it may, the most useful thing may have been bringing to public attention that there really is a significant problem here that we ought to do something about. Now, fortunately, in a very peculiar sense of fortunately, things dragged on quite a bit before we did anything about this, and so we could quote bigger numbers as time passed, and we got up to 45 million at least Americans without health insurance. Hopefully that will go down with what's happening now, but that's probably the most important thing we did there. I think Alex's talk was right on target on talking about what we were trying to address, what we were trying to do in the Deciding to Forgo Treatment report. I think the reason that was so influential was we were facing these questions much more frequently in healthcare settings and hospitals in particular. And there was a general sense of people and physicians in particular not being confident about what it was okay to do. And I used to hear once a week when I started working in Rhode Island Hospital, oh, you can't stop treatment because that's illegal. Well, it wasn't then. It isn't now, but nevertheless, it was widely believed by physicians. And this is a terrible philosophical argument, but when I went back to, when I left Washington, went back to Providence, one of the early things I did was to go to a case conference over at Rhode Island Hospital. And the risk manager walked in carrying our report on deciding to forego life-sustaining treatment. And he basically said, well, the President's Commission says it's okay, so it's okay. Now, that's, as I say, if a student ever wrote that in a paper, you'd flunk them. But nevertheless, it was a way in which we did some good work. I think that Alex is right that what we haven't done at all, and I think it'll be much harder, is to help frame the rationing healthcare in a way that enables that debate to go forward more productively than it has so far. Over the next decade, I have little doubt that that will be one of the central issues that the healthcare system faces. It's quite clear to me that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, does a much better job addressing the access to healthcare problem than the rising cost of healthcare problem, and we will have to tackle that better than we have. That's enough on. I'm just going to make some random remarks on some of the talks remarks that occurred to me as I either read them beforehand or listened to them. Johann's talk, I've told Johann, Dan Wickler and I have had conversations for many years about the next generation of bioethicists and worrying about where they were coming from and why we couldn't find them and so forth. People like Johann, and Johann in particular, basically relieve my anxiety about that. I've told Johann I expect great things from him. I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but I do expect great things from you. And I found your paper actually very interesting. I take it the core of the argument that you made is that there's the persons who face a greater risk, and that means partially probability and partially the seriousness of the harm, have a greater claim on our trying to do something to relieve them of that risk. Actually, I think that wouldn't, in all cases, and I believe that you probably would agree with this, that wouldn't, in all cases, favor treatment over prevention. Suppose there are 100 patients who need treatment, and if they don't get it, only a few of them will die. You don't know which ones. So 2 or 3 patients will die, but who they will be, you don't know. Alternatively, there are another 100 patients who you think need prevention, because if they don't get it, 20 of them will die. Well, then if you simply look at who's facing the greater risk, it's the patients who need prevention, and as opposed to the patients who need treatment. So that the argument that you make, which I'm actually very attracted to and learned from, doesn't map exactly onto the treatment prevention issue. I also am very sympathetic to your pluralist view, namely that one notion is not going to settle the treatment and prevention issue. Let me speak a word about Dan Hausman's paper. If I wanted to keep you here, I'm probably keeping you from drinks, which is about the worst thing anyone can ever do to anyone. But if I wanted to keep you here for a long while, I could argue a lot with Dan. He knows that. But Dan is also someone that I've learned from on many occasions, and did again today and a day or so ago when I read his paper. On the fair chances argument, which I am attracted to, I think people in distress, and real people like us, who become medically vulnerable and are in need of some particular form of treatment, when they want a fair chance at what they need when cost effectiveness wouldn't favor them, I think it's probably not very relieving to them to say, well, if you had ended up with a different genetic code, then you'd be the one that was favored now. And so you had your fair chance. You got it before you were actually born, but you got it. I think if we want a fair chance, we want it as embodied living individuals who are in circumstances where we have a serious need, and we want a fair chance at getting that need satisfied. So I'm a adherent of the fair chances argument. What was more interesting in some ways to me was his treatment of aggregation issues and severity issues, or the worst off issues. Why would Dan asked at one point, why would one be a prioritarian? And actually, I think the reason most people who would call themselves prioritarians was something that I never heard mentioned today. A lot of us at one point have been attracted to egalitarian views, and often at least egalitarian with regard to outcomes, what Derek Parfit would, I think, call telic egalitarians. And then along came Derek too, and Larry. There's some dispute whether Larry came first or Derek came first, but in any event, both Larry and Derek made us familiar with the so-called leveling down objections. Derek's view, some of you haven't read him. If you haven't, you should. And in particular, his book, Reasons and Persons, which is not his latest book, but certainly is about, for me, as pleasurable a philosophy book as is out there. And I taught it one year in a graduate seminar, and it was more fun than any graduate seminar I ever gave. But the leveling down objection is, well, suppose there's a community in which half the community is blind and half the community is sighted. And then, and it could be a natural event. It's easier to assume there's a natural event which makes the sighted people blind. So now the whole community is blind, and in a way that doesn't make the original half that were blind any better off than they were before. Well, things have become more equal in that society than they were before in an important dimension, namely whether they can see. Has anything good happened? Derek asked. And I know Larry has a different view on this, but has anything good happened? And Parfit said, no. It's not as if something good has happened, namely it's more equal, but that's overridden by the welfare losses to the whole community or anything of that sort. He wanted to argue that most of us would say nothing good has happened. If that's what we want to say, then Parfit argued we're not, in fact, egalitarians, because if we're egalitarians, we should say something good has happened, namely the community is much more equal in a way that is in a respect that's important, even if all things considered that equality is overridden by, say, a welfare loss or whatever. And I think the leveling down objection has ended up convincing a lot of philosophers that thought originally they were egalitarians, that maybe they don't want to be egalitarians, maybe they want to be prioritarians instead. It initially convinced me of that, and then it has left me not sure what I want to be on this issue, as opposed to having clearly moved to become a prioritarian. I think that's one of the main, if not the main answer to Dan's question about why would one be a prioritarian, because one was an egalitarian, and then one has decided that that was a mistake because of the leveling down objection. I won't go through trying to defend the few reasons that I gave in that one paper for why one might want to be a prioritarian. That was sort of, to some degree, a couple of pages that I should have done more with. I'm not convinced myself of the arguments I gave, so I don't see any reason to try to spend a lot of time convincing you. I do think that it is interesting to try to think about what you asked us to think about, which is maybe responses of compassion and wanting to rescue people who are in very dire circumstances really accounts for more of how we respond to what are usually called the priority to the worse off issues, and to some extent the aggregation question as well. One of the things I like doing about doing philosophy is I get pleasure out of writing papers. But I also get a lot of pleasure out of reading other people's papers and finding, gee, I'd never thought about that before. And I haven't really thought before about thinking about some of these issues in terms of non-fairness frameworks, like you suggested for us, but frameworks of compassion and the empathy we feel when people are in terrible circumstances. Now, you haven't convinced me that fairness is irrelevant to thinking about those problems, which Norm was the first one to write the paper about 4 unresolved problems in, well, it's in Rationing. I don't forget the exact title of your, okay, right. And they're still unresolved. So I think you gave us an additional interesting way to think about those. I'm reluctant to abandon fairness in thinking about them, because they often are about how some people are doing with regard to how other people are doing. And that's what fairness is, in my view, centrally about. It's not about how one person is doing, but how one person is doing in comparison to how others are doing, and what's making for the difference in them. Now, I think the only one I haven't talked about yet is the one that we just heard on transplantation. And if I'd been called upon to be the commentator, it's not an issue I followed that much, but I think I would have agreed both with the large thrust of what Norm and Bob had to say. And so I think I'll end on because it's drinks time, I'll end on a humorous note. One of the things that's gotten a lot of attention in transplantation over recent years is the issue about organ sales, and whether whether organs should be for sale. And they could be for sale in ways that, they could be sold to the people could get compensated for donating them to a central body that was run by the government, and then you could distribute them on whatever basis you thought was the just way to distribute them, with the idea being here that you simply use the organ sales as a way of increasing the supply, which could then be justly distributed. Now, I'm not sure many of you, Dan Wickler has heard me make this offer before, but my view has always been that the idea that somehow it was inappropriate to commercialize body parts like organs, they shouldn't be for sale, because somehow, without saying exactly why, the view was it was simply creepy to be selling organs. My view has always been that the only thing that would be wrong with organ sales is if some people or groups are getting exploited. And so at more than one conference where this issue came up, I have offered my second kidney to anyone who wants to purchase it. The initial price was $2 million, I believe, and needless to say, I haven't gotten any offers. Now, I didn't try to put it on the internet and see what I could get there. I'm close to 10 years older than I was when I first offered it, so I do think the price should go down, and so my health isn't what it once was, and so let's say $1 million, and possibly willing to entertain offers. And I say that, I've used that example seriously in some discussions, because I think if the issue with regard to organ sales is exploitation, I would not be exploited if anyone took me up on that offer. I'm not desperate for money. I have good alternatives for getting it. People wouldn't be taking advantage of my unjustly deprived condition, because I'm not in an unjustly deprived position. And so without saying anything about the issues that Norm and Bob actually talked about, I make that offer once again at a reduced price. You can think of us as having a sale on my second organ. And the offer is good at that price for, I don't know, at least a few months. So thank you all. I'm deeply grateful for all of you coming to this event. I'm deeply grateful for Bob and Dan Wickler for having organized it. And I'm deeply grateful for so many of you who I've worked with over the years and who've made my work in this area as pleasurable as it's been. So thank you again.
So just before you all leave, just 3 quick comments here. First of all, as some of you know, Dan's colleagues in the Division of Medical Ethics have chosen to honor him by creating the Dan Brock Fund for Bioethics to continue Dan's legacy within the program. I would encourage someone to make an offer on Dan's kidney, because I'm sure he would then donate the money to the fund, and we would be off to a great start. But if any of you have, rich aunts or things like that, it would be a terrific way to extend Dan's legacy. A significant portion of it. Second thing is that we have a reception, beer and wine, that is 1 floor down, crackers and stuff too, but mostly the beer and the wine. And so please join us for that. And the third thing is I would like to extend a great thanks to Helena Martins and Christine Morera, who worked tirelessly to put this together. Thanks once again to everyone. I look forward to seeing you downstairs.